Welcome to these meetings of Dundee City Council's Children and Family Services and City Development Committees, which are being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the meeting chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise, and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves it. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item or move a motion or amendment, please use the meeting chat. The convener will then invite you to speak. Where items are for noting or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the meeting chat. Otherwise, the item will be agreed. Please do not use the meeting chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the meeting chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committees, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries indicated, so I will now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call for the minute. Thank you.
Convener.
Present.
Councillor Alexander.
I'm present.
Depute Lord Provost Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Cardell.
Present.
Councillor Dawson.
Present.
Councillor Flynn.
Present.
Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Councillor Rendell.
Present.
Bailey Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Rome.
Present.
Councillor Ross.
Present.
Bailey Sawyers.
Present.
Councillor Short.
Here.
Councillor Smith.
I'm here.
Bailey Keenan.
Present.
Councillor Cruikshank.
Present.
Councillor McCready.
Present.
Councillor McIrvin.
Present.
Councillor Malone. Councillor Malone?
Yeah, I'm here, sorry.
Sorry. Councillor Mara.
Present.
Councillor Richardson.
Present.
Bailey Wright.
Present.
Bailey Scott.
Bailey Scott said he might be a bit late. He's got a residents meeting at 5, but he said he's going to join just as soon as he can.
Right, okay. Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Bailey McPherson.
Good evening, present.
Councillor Duncan.
Present.
Lord Provost.
Say that again.
Present.
Councillor Murray.
I'm here.
Miss Manns. Mrs. Leck. Mr. Chauhan. Mr. Baxter.
Present.
Miss Barclay.
Present.
Miss Rabtka.
Here.
Mr. Anderson McGuinness.
Present.
Okay, thank you. I'll just check again. Miss Manns? Mrs. Leck? Mr. Shohan? No. That concludes the roll call.
Mrs. Leck is here. I don't know if she's managed to get herself off mute, but I can see her waving on the screen.
Right, okay, I'll mark her present. Thank you. That then takes us on to the first item of business, declaration of interest. Does anybody have any declarations? That takes us on to item 2, parent and pupil representation on the Children and Family Services Committee. You are advised that with regard to parent representation, Katie Radke has been re-nominated as the primary representative and John Anderson McGuinness has been re-nominated as the secondary representative. The representative for the pupil has been withdrawn currently and a pupil rep will be nominated in due course. Do you approve the appointments?
Okay. Councillor Malone, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah. What's going on?
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Malone, you want to raise an issue on this?
Sorry, it was just, it was actually when I was struggling to get connected there, I was losing the signal. It was just on the declaration of interests. I have an interest in item 17 of the city development as a result of my employer being involved.
Okay, I think that's obviously for city development and we'll leave that declaration until that committee starts. But other than that, is this item agreed?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that takes us on to item 3, proposal to change the school terms, holidays and in-service days for session 2020-21. This is for noting as it was dealt with as essential council business.
Okay, that item is noted. Does anybody have anything? Okay, so I'm just checking the chat there. No, so that's been agreed.
Okay, item 4, Children and Family Service COVID-19 recovery. You have a report before you.
Okay, I won't do much introduction to this. We obviously discussed a lot of this at the last P&R committee, but obviously non-elected members have not had an opportunity to discuss that. That's why the item is here tonight. You will note that in part of the report, we said that the executive director would give an update, particularly as obviously there's been a few outbreaks in schools since the report was published. So I'll now just invite Mr. Counci to give the committee an update of where we are since the report was published.
Happy to do that, convener. I'm pleased to report that we did have positive cases in St Peter and Paul, St Clements and Grove. The self-isolation period is now over and these schools are fully returned with all pupils and staff. Kings Park open today for staff and staff will be in the school Monday, Tuesday, and then there'll be a phasing that will take place over the rest of the week and over the following week with pupils returning full-time to Kings Park from the week beginning 21st of September. In terms of, there have been 2 further positive cases reported just on Sunday. One was at St John's High School in Dundee. There's 1 positive case and we have 14 pupils and 2 members of staff self-isolating with a return date of September the 18th. And the sibling of the positive cases in St John's has also been deemed positive and attends Dens Road Primary School. And in that case, we have 19 pupils self-isolating with a return date of September the 18th, 2 members of staff and 1 member of support staff. I'm pleased to say that there's been good progress made on Kings Park, working with a range of partners. A small steering group have looked at the risk assessment with the support of public health and some minor adjustments have been made to that and an evaluation has taken place of the situation and why the positive cases had arisen And what will be done over the next 2 weeks is work with staff to implement these small changes and inviting the pupils back in, as I say, full time from September the 21st. And that's our current situation. We're working very closely with public health and they've been guiding us through this. And I think that it's been a good partnership. It's certainly been a learning experience for us. But we anticipate that this may be a pattern that might remain for some time, and we'll have to actually deal with this as positive cases arise involving staff or involving pupils.
Okay, so I noticed that Councillor Cruikshank, you've indicated you've got a motion. Certainly happy to come to that, but I'll go to the questions first, and then we'll come to your motion. So the first one I see is Bailey McPherson.
Thanks indeed, convener. It's a point and a question, because I think I would concur with colleagues who have agreed with me in saying, just to put much praise upon teaching staff, support staff, the director of the department, who have worked so hard, not just since term has returned, but throughout the spring and the lockdown period, supporting the community support centres and our pupils when they were learning from home. I think massive effort has been put in by staff, and I think that really should go on record our grateful thanks to what they have done and what they are continuing to do. My question really sits around the point in the financial implications under section 3, and it alludes in section 3.2 to the Scottish Government flexibilities, which obviously flexibilities are welcome at a time when your financial situation is very challenging indeed, as I think we would all agree is the case. But nonetheless, I would be grateful for some comment and reassurance from the director in relation to the areas of early learning and childcare, pupil equity fund and attainment challenge monies in relation to ensuring that, frankly, we do not see frankly these falling behind, because that's the big concern in this, that as a result of the financial challenges facing Dundee City Council, that key areas that we've put so much effort into over the years in relation to the expansion of early learning, for example, challenging, improving attainment and so on. And the last thing we want to see is things falling behind. So I'd be grateful if the director could give the committee some update and reassurance in relation to that.
Okay, Master Director, come in.
Thanks for that question, Bailey McPherson. I think, as was expressed at the P&R committee last, the COVID costs that Children and Family Services are experiencing have been quantified, and we're confident that they actually can be covered from carry forwards that we have from last year from the early years and childcare, and that's the intention, would be to use these carry forwards. I think what I would want to also add is that this is an ongoing situation. I don't think we're at the bottom of this yet, and I think we need to be prudent in terms of how we go forward. So the flexibilities have been identified. We fully intend to utilise these for the purposes that they've been given, and in fact, that's what we've been asked to do. But I think we need to work closely with our schools in identifying any changes that occur to ensure that actually we've got a stable budget to be able to deal with this. But as I say, we fully anticipate that the Pupil Equity Fund, the early years and the attainment challenge funds will be used for the purposes that have been set out. But I'm happy at this point maybe to ask if the Executive Director of Corporate Services wishes to comment further on that, because we've been working quite closely together on our COVID costs and our response to that.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks, Mr. Clancy. I don't think there's anything else that I'd like to add in terms of the information that you've shared with committee. And we have included within the report presented to Policy and Resources Committee a £4 million use of flexibilities. However, as you've outlined, we are looking to have maximum use of the carry forward balances and have very limited use of PEF or attainment. The only thing that I would just like to advise committee is obviously there are some unknowns that we are seeing in terms of additional costs with funding becoming available quite regularly. So I think through the COVID reporting that I'm intending to do through Policy and Resources Committee, I'll ensure that you're kept fully up to date regarding the use of those flexibilities, along with when additional funding is available from Scottish Government, particularly in relation to Children and Family Service.
Okay, Bailey McPherson, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm grateful to both Mr Clancy and Mr Colgan for that, and the reassurance that we will be kept updated. As I said at Policy and Resources Committee, I think we would all agree that Dundee City Council and indeed its citizens should not be out of pocket for doing the right thing during the COVID emergency, and there should be no, slipping back in terms of what has been achieved thus far in relation to, for example, attainment and seeing. We obviously all want to see things continuing to improve. So I'm grateful for the responses from the officers, convener. Thank you.
Okay. The next one I have is Councillor Duncan.
Thanks, convener. Firstly, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, it's just with these techie things going on. Yeah, first thing, I'd certainly like to associate myself with the positive remarks about the teaching staff. They've done a magnificent job, all the education people have, and they've certainly had their work cut out in recent times. My question really is on page 3, it's under the heading Recovery, item 5.1. There's mention of exams in there, and I'm asking this question because I've been asked by members of the public and also members of the teaching profession. Has this council given any thought, around are exams going to proceed as normal or indeed at all? It might be too early for you to give a definitive view, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I think I'm happy to pass over to the Chief Education Officer if she wants to provide a response to this.
Thank you for the question, and the answer is we probably are, it is a bit early to give a definitive answer, Councillor Duncan. There are lots of discussions happening nationally through the ADIS network, working closely in partnership with SQA, and that's still very much at the start of that conversation, and we're asking our schools to gather as much evidence of assessment for our young people right from the start of this year as much as we can, so that if we ever found ourselves, hopefully not, but if we ever found ourselves in a similar situation, we would have really robust evidence of young people's assessments. But just now we still don't have an answer. The official answer is they're planning to go ahead with the exams next year. It may be a reduced diet and it may be pushed back a few weeks, but none of that is absolutely bottomed out yet.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for that, in particular way assured that there's going to be particular effort made to gather evidence. We certainly don't want a repeat of recent events nationally. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duncan. The next one I see is Councillor Malone.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Charlie. On you go.
Okay, good. I'm having similar issues to Councillor Duncan. Can I also start off by thanking, and I think we all should be grateful and thank the efforts that have gone on within education in Dundee to get us to a position where we can start a recovery. Without the effort and the hard work of teaching staff in particular over the summer, I know only too well the kind of pressures my team are under, albeit at a different level of education. And the idea that people have had a summer this summer is one that's not realistic. So we should thank people for the work that they've done on our behalf. I think that the recovery paper is welcome, but I have some issues in terms of some of the sense making that I get from the paper. It talks about a recovery, but yet we don't have in the paper an estimate of what that recovery is, what the recovery issues are, and the scale of the recovery issues. I know in 5.7 it's saying that it's very much going to be left to individual schools to examine the recovery requirements and introduce recovery plans. But I would have thought that we would have a more strategic oversight of the situation in Dundee as a whole, to target areas, to look at areas that might need special resources and special funding and support, and as we as a council are the people who would be responsible for providing that. So I would just maybe like an indication of what's the situation in Dundee, where are the hotspots in Dundee where recovery is urgently required. I suggest it's probably all over the city, but there will be schools that have had lower levels of participation within the teaching that was delivered in blended delivery, and we've got really no insight into that. So I would have thought the paper would have something that said, here's the scale of the problem we've got, or here is the situation we've got, and here are the resources that are going to be aligned to that situation in order to ensure the schools at an individual level are able to meet the recovery requirement.
Mr. Clancy?
Yeah, happy again. I'll hand over to the Chief Education Officer to start with that. I may come in later.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malone, and thank you, convener. So yeah, I take the point that you're making, but let me just try and put a context around that, if I may, and see if that answers your question. First of all, I suppose what we had to do was get our schools open and everything that we needed to do around that, around risk assessment and so on, to make sure buildings were safe for both staff and pupils to return. As part of that recovery back to school, the priorities were to get children into school settled and safe, and very much take a nurturing approach and look after their well-being first and foremost. Also, beyond that, then we had to look at new routines, in particular new routines around hygiene and practices, staggered starts, staggered breaks, lunches and so on, and finishes to the day. And so we asked our head teachers to make sure that that was the priority, and we're keeping in very close contact with our head teachers. We're meeting them, albeit virtually, but far more regularly than we would normally meet them. And so we're hearing that they feel now they're in a position where they can really get down to really focusing on the learning and where the gaps are and the missed learning is. And not that they didn't know about that when the children were engaging or not engaging, but the most important thing was to settle them back into school. And so we're looking at gathering data before the October holidays of where exactly we think the biggest priorities would be. It's really important that we look at what we've done, and I mean, I know the next report is, or one of the next reports is the Attainment Challenge report, and we're looking at how we can target the support that we've given to schools in the last session and redirect that support to schools where we think we really need to do. But that's actually going to be aided by the data we're trying to collect in the next few weeks. So we will target schools, and we will target our teams around these schools the way we did last year, because of our different targeted and proportionate approach to school improvement. But I do think it's worth, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but obviously the impact on COVID is much bigger for our children and families than just their attainment. You know, the impact in terms of society, in terms of the economic situation that we find ourselves in, and the social impact that this has had on our families is really, really important. That we don't lose sight of, and our head teachers are very, very conscious of that and very aware of it. And it's rightly if people have thanked them and their colleagues for supporting our young people and our families through the whole of lockdown and right through that summer holiday, through volunteering to look after our children. So I suppose it's about, you know, remembering that we're all in this together as well, and it's not just a school response, that actually school is part of the solution for recovery. But the wider society issues are still there with us, and we will look for our partners, as they did through lockdown, to work with us to support that too.
Just maybe to add to what the Chief Education Officer.
Councillor Malone, I'll allow Mr. Clancy to just respond. Yeah, okay. Councillor Malone, I'll let Mr. Clancy finish, and then I'll let you back in.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Charlie. I'll be brief. Just to say, I agree with what's been said. Obviously, through the Attainment Challenge and through PEF, there is already proportionate targeting of additional funding towards situations of greater deprivation. And although there's not an absolute clear correlation all the way through between that and those who've lost time in terms of this pandemic with the learning, there is a reasonably clear correlation. So I think there's already additional resources there that may need to be tweaked, and the best people to be able to do that are the schools and the teachers who know the young people. In addition to that, there's national materials being made available, national support, and one of the things that we're doing is looking to try and, where best we can, through the purchase of laptops and other IT devices and data, try and even out a digital divide, which will assist that. And I would say the other group where we've got less time would be young people who'll be sitting examinations next year. And so there's a special focus there from the schools, because these young people, it's time limited as to when these examinations are sat. So there is a prioritisation within it. But for us, what will be key here is the teachers' knowledge of the young people and the use of the additional resources that we've been provided with.
Okay, Councillor Moore, I'll let you come back in now.
No, okay. I just want to say I was grateful for both answers. I think that reading the report, I didn't get a sense of what the challenge was, other than this idea that individual schools were going to be responsible for catch-up. I'm delighted that Audrey May's kind of given us the assurance that there is going to be some kind of analysis at a citywide, on a citywide basis, and that we as councillors will be able to see kind of the resources are properly applied or provided to support our teachers in the work they're doing to get our kids back to a level of learning and education that they would have been without the COVID virus. So I'm grateful for those answers.
Okay, thank you. The next person I had is Bailey Keenan.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to thank Mr Clancy for opening his remarks around the schools and giving the reassurance that they're starting to reopen. But that leads to the question of what have we learned by the transmission that went on at Kings Park, and what lessons have we learned, and how have we addressed risk assessment and method statements of working procedures moving forward, and have we done any checks to check compliance in other schools to make sure that whatever we're doing whatever we can to protect our staff and the pupils in the school, so there isn't that level of transmission. And we certainly don't want to ever have to close a school, given the amount of people that are affected by that. So I would like the reassurance that we'll have learned a lesson. There is changes that we've noticed that things have slipped up in some way, and that we've addressed it, and we will address the issues moving forward.
Okay, Mr Clancy.
I'd like to thank Bailey Keenan for his question. And to be clear, I think this is a new world for everybody. We've never actually had to run schools under these circumstances with large numbers. Kings Park poses particular challenges because of the unique needs of the young people there. It's a large special school with large numbers of staff, and I think the planning was of a very high quality, but there were certain things that were probably not anticipated that can only be experienced once you actually see the school in operation. I think there's been lessons we've learned about staff movement that we have to consider. There's probably things to do, particularly in Kings Park, with some of the care arrangements with the young people where you require more than one adult. Where it's planned, it tends to work very well, but you have unplanned events that sometimes occur, and it's making sure that there's proper use of PPE in these unplanned events. So there's a number of things that are particular to Kings Park that I think has come through from the review that's taken place by the working group. I'd like to thank them for the work that they've put in, our trade union colleagues for working quickly to look at it. And I'd like to say that I think the risk assessment itself, most of it was very good. It was straightforward. I think we've had to reinforce to staff the real need to maintain social distance and not to let that slip. And that's a message, I think, for all of us, not just staff in schools, but staff right across Scotland and people right across Scotland. That social distancing and infection control is key to that. So that's had to be reinforced. As I say, I think the lessons that are more generic stemming from Kings Park is that we need to have information and data readily at hand to be able to contact pupils and staff quickly. I think we had that for Kings Park, but it could be sharper, and that's something we've passed out to schools where, in the event of a positive case, we need to be able to respond quickly. And I'm pleased to say in the cases that have occurred in the last 2 weeks, we have been able to respond very quickly and hopefully give parents warning and make the process as smooth as possible. I would say it's the it's the maintenance of that social distance is absolutely key. And where it cannot be maintained, in Kings Park is very specific, some of the needs that are there. It's making sure that the PPE is used absolutely properly and time is taken for that to happen. So a number of lessons. Audrey's been meeting with the schools to pass these lessons on, the things that we've learned. But I would want to say that I do think this is going to be something that will, hopefully you're going to minimise its occurrence, but I think it will happen again. Just as these positive cases are occurring round about us, if it involves staff or children, at that point there, we need to be ready to respond. I fully accept what Bailey Keenan's saying. We need to be doing everything in our power to ensure that transmission within that school, if it occurs at all, is at a minimal level if we can't completely eradicate it. It is a challenge. There's no question about it. It's a challenge, but I'm confident that some of the learning that's come from Kings Park will help us in this journey that we're on with our schools.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, the next person I have is Mr. Baxter. Sorry, David, are you there? Okay.
Are you looking for me?
Okay, what? Yes, David, on you go.
Oh, sorry, I missed the question. Sorry, I didn't know both.
You had your hand up, so I presumed you had a question.
No, sorry, that was my fault. Couldn't use the technology.
That's absolutely fine. It's all new for all of us, so thank you. So the next person I have is Councillor Mara.
Thanks very much, Convener. I dissociate myself with all the comments about our teaching staff across the city and the circumstances they've dealt with. I want to make particular mention to our head teachers in the schools across Dundee, who I think have had to lead all of those teachers in the challenge, along with colleagues from the Education Department, and also dealing with repeated U-turns from the Scottish Government, first on the blended learning approach and return to schools, and then the SQA fiasco, which has resulted in a huge amount of work, frankly, at times being wasted, and then having to be replicated again, and actually to see the kind of stoic approach that those head teachers have taken, and to bring their staff through that, and the communities that they lead, I think is they've been a testament to the city and to all the people that they serve. I had a couple of questions, if that's okay, Convener. My first one related to contingency planning, and I'd hoped to see more around this in COVID recovery about a formalised contingency for return to blended learning if it was required. We've now got a situation where there's over 1 million people in Scotland as of tonight back in partial lockdown. We know that cases are rising significantly across the whole of the United Kingdom and across Europe. So I don't think we can ignore the fact that we may well be back in a situation maybe akin to what we saw a few weeks ago. We know that the contingency that was the first plan for blended learning wasn't acceptable and therefore had to be scrapped eventually by the Education Secretary. I'd like to know what we're putting in place in a formal setting in Dundee to make sure we have a contingency plan that can work. Because Mr. Clancy has just told us that, for instance, what's happened in Kings Park will happen again. So I want to know what the plan is to make sure we've got a formal process to make sure that we can put in place something that's acceptable to maintain education. So that's my first question, if that's okay, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Clancy.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Mara, for the question. I think in terms of the contingency planning, there was a lot of work went into that contingency plan, and we were fully ready to operationalise the contingency plan up until about 2 weeks before school started. And that involved a significant amount of work with schools in terms of setting up where the schools would be, how schools would actually operate, what percentage of blended learning there would be, what percentage of pupils we would have in the school. And we tried to optimise that towards a 50% model. And we had, I think, almost managed to achieve that right throughout the school estate. In fact, I think we did send elected members a report that laid out the schools and what the percentage pupil times were within school. So I think the first point I'd want to make is we actually had that to the point of ready to go. And so schools have actually done a lot of the work that sets the blended model up and running. And there was a lot that was learned throughout lockdown in terms of working with pupils at a distance. I think the actual contingency plan is much easier than that because you have the pupils in the school for half the week. So you're actually able to look at work and pass work on. So I'm not pretending it's an easy option, and it's certainly an option that we're not looking to implement. The option that we want to work with is all school pupils being back in, and that is plan A. And we want to work to that right through the session, if that is possible. That's certainly our intention, and deal with any outbreaks as they occur, as we have done so far, and work with small groupings that might need to be self-isolated rather than moving the contingency plan. But we do have contingency plans in terms of percentage pupil attendance. We know where we need extra accommodation. That's already been identified and worked through. Health and safety risk assessments have been carried out in these places, and we've actually brought in staffing already to be able to cover the need to move to the contingency plan if it's required, because we had additional monies given to us and we took on 41 extra staff. So these staff are not actually being used at the moment to deliver the contingency plan. We've spread them around our schools, but if it's required, we would look at operationalising that in a different way to allow the contingency plan to run. So I would say I'm very confident if it were ever required, the contingency plan could operate, but maybe ask if the Chief Education Officer wants to add anything to that.
Not very much. I think you've covered most of it, Paul, in terms of we had plans originally. It was a mixed model between 33% and 50%. Then there was an announcement made, as Councillor Marr has referred to, some of the ongoing changes to some of the policy direction, and 50% was seen as in a minimum approach to blended learning. So we had to go back and rewrite plans for schools who were finding it difficult to achieve that within their own buildings. So there was a mixture of church halls, community halls and libraries identified to support 50% blended learning in all schools. So the default position would be if we have to close a school, we would go to that model in terms of 50% using the community facilities there as well. Plus, we have got the extra staffing in place, and we are using the staff to identify small groups of children, as we touched on earlier, who might require smaller group tuition to help them catch up some of their learning. And we've also got a digital programme as we roll out the additional laptops and tablets that we ordered for young people that head teachers had identified. There were gaps there too. So it's a mixed picture of how we would move forward. It's not you're right, Councillor Marr, it's not so explicit in the recovery plan, but it was because it was in place, if you like, because we thought that's what we were going to go to in August. And so it's still sitting there if we need to go back to that.
Yeah, Camilla, can I? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Marr, you come.
Thank you, Camilla. I mean, I remain concerned, as I think we all will be. I mean, these plans were the plans that were then rejected by the Education Secretary across the whole of Scotland when he moved us back into a different situation. And he was quite explicit about the fact that there were issues. I do take some reassurance, I think, from the additional teaching staff that you've identified from and brought in the NQT teachers and the capacity that will give us. But I think it would be appreciated if that plan could maybe be recirculated, and then we could look at that, and if there's any issues that we have to pick up, maybe all members of the committee, including the non-elected members, would appreciate an additional sight of that. My second question related to just a clarification, if it's possible. Mr. Clancy talked earlier on about around catch-up planning and the redirection of finance. Redirection was the word he used, around resource that was to from some of the previous funds that were to help close the attainment gap, and how that might be addressed into this area. Now, we know that actually the 5 months out of school will have expanded that attainment gap quite dramatically. And the experts from across Scotland are telling us that will be the case, and indeed internationally. It was my understanding that the Scottish Government had announced £100 million of funding for catch-up. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I've done some reading on it. It seems to indicate, and there's a Reform Scotland report that references that additional funding. Is there a bit of double counting going on here? Could you give me some clarity as to what that funding is going to be used for in Dundee if it was meant to be for catch-up? How is that going to be applied?
Okay. Mr. Clancy?
I'm happy to hand over to the Chief Education Officer, but I'll come back in if she feels she wants me to.
Apologies, issue unmuting. Yeah, well, it was a combination of the money that we've already alluded to in terms of additional funding for extra teachers. So the idea that we could take our NQTs on, and obviously if they met the standard through interview process and so on, but there was extra funding for teachers. There was extra funding for additional COVID costs such as PPE and cleaning and so on. So they're included in there. But also there's additional monies that we can bid into, you know, for extra IT as well. So the digital offer is in there too. However, we also are aware that we were given the opportunity to be more flexible in how schools are spending their PEF, or how we were spending the Scottish Attainment Grant Fund that we already had. So if we wanted to you know, manipulate that in a different way and use it for different priorities because of things that were emerging through lockdown, then we could do that. Now, we did have some carry forward, so use some of that for initial IT and digital equipment. But other than that, we've looked at our plans, and what we've agreed with the head teacher group is that actually the plans need to continue. We've not started new plans for this school session. We've gone back and we've actually said, just let's roll these plans forward, because what we were doing was moving in the right direction, and within that we will target individual groups of children and individual schools to just direct our central support to those schools or to those groups of children, or teachers can, head teachers can also do a wee bit of that with their PEF planning as well. But we're not creating a whole load of new plans. We're saying the plans are the plans we roll forward, and that's making it more manageable for schools this year, so that we're not creating a whole load of new plans, so they can move forward but be flexible in the spend within these plans.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Colgan wants to come in, so I'll allow Mr. Colgan to come in because maybe wants to answer about this as well.
Thanks, Convener. Just in response to Councillor Marrick's question, he's right, there was 100 million announced from the government. There's been various chunks of that, so if it's helped committee, I'm willing to produce a summary of that £100 million just to give the committee an overall assurance that there is no double counting with the assumptions we've made and the additional government funding.
I'd appreciate
thank you, Mr.
that,
Colgan.
Convener. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get that out. We'll also we'll send out the 50% plans again to all members of the committee. I think next one I had was Bailey Wright. I think you had your hand up.
No, it was a mistake.
That's fine. It's just I want to make sure we're not missing anything, so I'll just bring you all in every time I see something. So with that, I don't see there's any other questions. So I will now bring in Councillor Cruikshank, who has a motion.
Convener, would you like us to circulate the motion?
Yeah, that would be good, Roger. Thank you.
Can I suggest then that as the committee services officer is attending to that, Councillor Cruikshank reads out the terms of her amendment so the press and public are aware?
Oh.
Or I could read it out if that would be helpful.
Right, I've got it here. Right, I wanted to start off, well, I'll read the motion out first and then I'll go into the blurb. It's item 4, 3.4. Instruct the Executive Director of Children and Family Services to write to the Scottish Government to seek ongoing multi-year commitment for the provision of IT devices for young people without access, to allow them equal opportunity to online learning to ensure no one is left behind. And the second part of that is instructs the Executive Director to agree with the Executive Director of Corporate Services to prioritise the IT section time to ensure the devices provided for pupils are fully customised and available as soon as possible. Okay.
Yeah, no, happy for you guys just to speak to your motion, Councillor Cruikshank.
Right, okay. Like other speakers before me, I want to start by thanking the Executive Director for the efforts of the department and partner agencies that were made in ensuring the most vulnerable children and young people were catered for during the worst times of the lockdown through the services provided via the community support centres. And a big thank you to the teaching staff for their input and for all the hard work on the blended learning, etc. Okay, the motion is simple. It seeks to enhance the opportunities for children and young people to gain access to a digital device to facilitate their online learning. I'm sorry, is somebody? Okay.
When you go, right. Georgia.
Yeah, as we are all aware, we've been through some terrible times due to the COVID, and children and young people have suffered greatly, in particular their learning. And these, if the Scottish Government were to provide ongoing funding for IT equipment so that no child is left behind and each child can catch up on the missed learning. And that could be done by using a mix of the blended learning that the teachers have already set in place. Because as been pointed out by Councillor Mara, you know, 5 months is a long time for a child to be out of school. And you can be assured that, you know, there'll be time added on to that because of the missed learning. I'm aware that the Scottish Government had purchased a number of digital devices, and the offer was to take a combination of the devices plus finance. However, Dundee City Council chose to take the finance as the devices were not deemed compatible with the ones that we use. I was advised early in April through briefings with the Executive Director and the Chief Education Officer that there had been 600 digital devices ordered. They've now been delivered, although they haven't been delivered to the young people. I would hope that that is done at speed. There was also a further 2,000, if I'm correct with my figures, that have been ordered, but then there isn't any signs of them coming to fruition as yet. So the motion is calling upon the Scottish Government to provide ongoing funding to ensure all young people that don't have access to a digital device and the necessary data for online learning, and also that the IT department prioritises the setting up of these devices for our young people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm certainly happy to accept your motion. Now, I think Councillor Malone was wishing to second it, but it's perhaps kind of dropped out again. So I don't know if Councillor Malone, if you're there. Okay. Certainly, I think Councillor McCurlin, you're going to then second if Councillor Malone isn't there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In the absence of Councillor Malone, I'm happy to formally second.
Okay. As I said, I'm more than happy to accept this motion, and I'd certainly ask the Executive Director if he wants to add anything to that at this moment.
Oh, just to thank Councillor Cruikshank for I think is a sensible suggestion, and to provide some reassurance as well that the Executive Director of Corporate Services Services and myself work very closely already, and we work very closely with the IT division, and they are prioritising the devices that are coming through for children and families. And you are right, Councillor Cruikshank, we have 640 devices that have recently arrived. They're being configured, ready to go out to the schools, and that's a matter of priority. There is then a significant number of devices coming after that. I think it's 1,450. It's 2,000, just over 2,000 devices in total. It's a massive job getting these configured and ready to go. But I've been given assurances that that will be a top priority for the IT team, who we have a very good working relationship with. And I certainly would be happy to contact Scottish Government and seek clarity on sustainability for this programme, because I think it would be welcomed, and I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
I think Bailey Keenan wants to make a comment.
Convener, just obviously thank you for taking that motion on board. I think it's really important that we try to deliver IT to all of our children right across the school estate. There has been a real need for it as people have went or had to go home as opposed to being in the classroom. And I think we must do everything we can. These devices could be used for homework and catch up. You know, there would have been lessons prepared that were done online. There's Glow that we use anyway. So, you know, let's see if we could put it to maximum use and bring education on in the city.
Bailey Keenan, thank you for that. Just going to double check there's nobody else who wants to come in. Councillor Malone, I see you've now been reconnected. Now, Councillor McKibben has seconded the amendment, sorry, the motion, but is there anything you want to say, as I know you probably had something prepared?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Now it's been seconded.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So obviously we're going to accept that motion, and I just want to say before we formally agree this report, just associate myself with all the comments, thanking staff. It's been a difficult 5 months, but I also think we should also thank parents as well, because I know it's been a difficult time for them, and certainly the Executive Director, the Chief Education Officer and myself have had regular conversations with parents over the last 5-6 months, and they've been really supportive and patient with us. So on that, I'm more than happy to move the report, but I think Mr. Menny. Sorry. Okay, sorry, I appear to have missed more than group leader, so I think Councillor Alexander wants to come in.
No, Stuart, do you know what? It's absolutely fine. I think everybody's contributions have said it perfectly well, so I'll leave it at that and allow you to move on. Thank you.
I thought it was always that easy to shut up my group leader. So on that, can we just agree this report?
Agreed.
Okay. Okay.
That takes us on to item 5 on the agenda, Scottish Attainment Challenge Progress Report.
Okay, so that's obviously just a report updating us where we are with the Attainment Challenge, and I think we've dipped into a little bit on the recovery plan, but I'll just check and see if anybody wants to come in. Councillor McCready.
Thanks very much, Convener. Admire your bravery and taking on the leader of the council there, but it's been you've done very well as convener so far anyway. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is to officers, and the purpose of the report. It says that the Attainment Challenge has the direct aim of closing the attainment gap by improving educational outcomes for children and young people living in Dundee's most deprived communities. Can I draw attention to page 15, Appendix 1? And if we look there at the staffing breakdown, we can see that there was an aim, I think, in the year 1920 to get 135.8 full-time equivalent staff employed through the Attainment Challenge. But in March 2020, there was only 108.9 full-time equivalents employed. And the figure was actually getting worse from December 2019 to March 2020. That's a shortfall of just under 27 jobs. I just wonder, given that closing that attainment gap and and rising to the Attainment Challenge should be a top priority for us, how's not using all the resources that are available helping deal with the Attainment Challenge? Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. I will ask Mr. Clancy to answer that.
Thank you, Councillor McCready, for the question. As with any kind of large group of staff, there's always slippage throughout the year. This slippage was mainly in the health and wellbeing assistance that had left as part of the programme. Once we actually reached the stage where the staff had left and we had this shortfall, we were at that stage looking to put in a bid for the next year. By the time the bid was approved, we were actually into COVID, so we've not actually had a chance to fully rectify this. But in saying that, we are looking now, these posts have been advertised and we're looking to fully deploy them. But I can assure you, it's not for the want of trying. These are temporary posts, and we do have a high turnover in some of these posts as staff gain more experience and move on. And there is a constant challenge to keep filling them. But that, I think, was the rationale for that. By the time we actually received the confirmation of the bid for the next year, we'd actually moved into lockdown. But happy to give you an assurance that we are looking to fully fill all of these posts in the near future.
Yeah, thanks very much for that response. I mean, I understand the response. I mean, the only thing I would say is, that, young people essentially get one chance at education here, which I think was one of the things that was coming out in the earlier discussion. That they don't have they don't really have slippage in their education, and probably, we need to do more. We will need to do more to make sure that people aren't left behind as a result of COVID-19, as I've said previously. So, I mean, I suppose it's a question for officers and for yourself, convener. I mean, I heard what Mr. Clancy said, but I mean, I think there's around it looks to me like around £733,000 not spent that could have been spent on the attainment challenge. I understand I understand that it's probably difficult to get to the point where you've got people employed all the time and all that sort of stuff. But I just think that we should be, I think, should I speak for everybody in the committee, that dealing with that attainment challenge has to be a top priority, and that I think we should be looking to use whatever resources we've got to make sure that young folk in the city get the best chance that they can. Because, I mean, some of those vacancies might have had an impact on on young people's life chances already. So I mean, I just want a bit of reassurance that we will try in future to try and make get the maximum we can for the investment that's available. Thanks.
Mr. Clancy, you want to come first?
Happy to provide that reassurance, Councillor McCready, and say that I completely agree with your comments. If we would like to make sure every pound was maximised, and that certainly is what we set out to do. And just to give you an assurance that we'll continue an endeavour to give that our best endeavour. Thanks.
And certainly from my point of view, happy to give that reassurance as well, that we'll do everything we can to maximise that funding. Councillor Cruikshank, I think you're next to come in.
Georgia, I think you're maybe muted.
Here's me blithering away. 4.3 of the report, the Dundee Attainment Challenge. At the end of the paragraph, it says the progress of the plan is monitored with regular reports provided to the Scottish Government. Can I request that the reports also come to this committee? Thank you.
So, Mr. Clancy, you want to go first?
Happy to make copies of the reports available to elected members.
Okay, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, I don't see anybody else want to come in. Can this report be agreed? Okay, I see that's been approved. Okay.
Okay, that takes us on to item 6, Carers Scotland Act 2016 and Young Carers.
Okay, before we go into this, Councillor Murray has a point of order.
Thanks, Convener. It was just to ask about which half of the committee that this paper's on. I know from hearing from officers that their view is that this matter is an education matter, but it's my opinion that it's a social work matter, and I was looking for some clarity on where it should be heard.
I'll first of all ask Mr. Merry to come in, and then we'll ask other officers if need be.
Thank you, Convener. As members will be aware, matters relating to schools are dealt with by the Children and Family Services Committee, and because this report contains many references and many implications for schools, it was felt appropriate to include it in the first part of the agenda when the education representatives would be present. In the past, this has previously been considered by the Social Work Committee, however, and I appreciate that Councillor Murray is indicating that in that extent, this is perhaps seen as an inconsistency. However, this has been the position for the last 2 years. If the committee would wish me to review the situation here and come back with a recommendation for next year's report, I'd be very happy to do that.
Okay, Councillor Murray, do you want to give you the opportunity to respond to that?
Thanks, Convener. I would certainly welcome any moves that would make it clearer which committee things go to. I think I was having a read of standing orders and I didn't think it was very clear. So anything that would tidy that up and make it obvious for everyone, I think would be welcome.
Okay, so certainly, first of all, I want to thank you because you gave me advance warning of your point of order, and we've had a discussion about this. And having spent the afternoon look at it, I do agree with you that it's maybe not as clear as it could be. And I think Mr. Merry's recommendation that we review it and see exactly just to tidy it up to make sure that everybody's absolutely clear of what the position is would be helpful. So my recommendation would be that we would actually do that review so that we're all clear in the future. But given that the last 2 times this report has come to committee, the non-elected members have stayed in the meeting, I think it's only appropriate that we do that for this meeting. And then we have that point of order clarified for the next time something like this comes to this committee. Would that satisfy you, Councillor Murray?
Yeah, I'm more than happy with that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So obviously this is a report about our young carers. I don't know if anybody has any questions or any comments they wish to make on this report. Okay, I see no. Yeah, yeah.
I would just say that I would be quite happy for it to be retained on the Children and Family Services Committee with the members of the Education Committee, non-elected members being present and seeing that. And I don't have an issue with it at all. Went and seen some of the young carers in our schools and seen some of the good work that was going on. I think it's important that people that represent education in a wider field and represent as church reps are aware of what's going on. So I would be reasonably happy for it to retain here. Thank you.
Okay, Bill Kerry, thanks for that. I think the point that, and I think I'll bring you in, Bill McPherson, after this, is that, you know, I just think it wasn't clear when I read the standing orders, and I think it's just a bit of clarity that we're looking for so that everybody knows exactly what the position is. And once we have that clarity, that may very well be the position that we come to. I think it was just to make sure that it was absolutely clear in everybody's mind. And I think that was the issue that I think certainly Councillor Murray raised, and certainly when I read it this afternoon, I just wanted a bit of clarity, and I think what Mr. Merry's offered is probably the best way to go. But Bill McPherson, I think you want to come in.
Thanks, Convener. I've absolutely no problem with the officers coming back to us on the clarity point. All I would say is I completely agree with the point Bailey Keenan's made. There are quite clear school implications in relation to this, and therefore I think it would be, quite frankly, a detrimental move if we were saying the non-elected members of the committee could not take part in future discussions over issues around the Carers Scotland Act and young carers, and as I say, particularly because of the school implications. So as I say, no problem with them coming back with some clarity. I would really be quite sad, to be frank, if we didn't have the non-elected members taking part.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill McPherson. I think Councillor Lynn, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it'd be rather unfortunate were we just to argue about what committee this should be at without actually saying anything about young carers and the work that they do for their loved ones. I attended, along with another councillor, I think it was Councillor Smith, the launch of the Young Ambassadors in the Dundee Carers Centre. And for the life of me, I can't remember if it was this year or last year. I've lost track of time, but it's a really, really good event. there was lots of them there, and interestingly, there was lots of them there even though it was an in-service day at the school and they could have been elsewhere. So it was really, really uplifting to see all those young people there to help other young carers. And yeah, it's a really good report. I'm pleased with it, and I particularly wanted to mention the work of the young ambassadors. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it is important that we do recognise the work that our young carers do. I've seen some of it in action myself, like I suppose a lot of members will have as well. And the work that the young carers do, we can't ever underappreciate what they do. And I think that was a really important point that you made there, to make sure that we didn't forget that over this report tonight. With that, does anybody else wish to come in, or can this be agreed? Okay, so that report's been agreed. Okay. And I think that's the business for children and families. So we'll.
Thank you, convener. Next committee is City Development.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to City Development and my first committee. I think we're just getting everybody leaving who's due to leave. Is everybody gone? Okay. I think that's everyone gone. We can proceed now. Over to you, Ali.
Item 1, declaration of interest. Admin declarations.
There's been no declarations.
I have.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Charlie.
Sorry, Convener, I have a declaration of interest against item 17 in respect of my employer, and I'm involved in the academic side of the project, so I'll declare an interest.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? No, I think that's it. Thank you. Okay, next, please.
Items 2 to 5 were dealt with under essential council business under for noting.
Is anybody any other views just for noting? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Item 6, new roads, road construction consent. I have this for noting.
This is just an agenda note, just for noting, and it's Delegate Bowers. Michael, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, convener. It just relates to the fee that was paid, that's noted against the Swallow roundabout as far back as 9th of March. I just wondered if there's any chance of any kind of update on that work, given that it's been delayed by some years. I get continuous complaints from residents who are worried that somebody's going to lose their life on that roundabout as the traffic increases due to the Western Gateway. People are awaiting the installation of the traffic signalling, and to make sure that safety improvements are put in place, and also to make sure that there is pedestrian access to the Western Gateway, of which there's none at the moment. So if the Executive Director was able to give me any kind of update on that, just given that it appears on the agenda, that would be useful.
Thank you. I'll pass over to the Executive Director if he was sitting, or pass it on.
Convener, many thanks for that. I confirm we have been in discussions with the developer, and Gregor Hamilton, the Head of Planning and Economic Development, can give a short update in terms of where discussions are at.
Thank you, Convener. As Mr. Presswood said, we've been keeping close contact with the developer Springfield Properties in relation to the negotiations that they are undertaking with the trust that owns a small area of land at Swallow Roundabout, which is required to implement in full the improvement to Swallow Roundabout that has planning permission. We're advised by both parties that progress is being made, and they are, we understand, close to being able to agree a settlement. We're obviously at the same time monitoring the progress with development in the Western Gateway and the number of completion certificates that have been granted, and making the developer aware that the obligation is there to effect the improvement to the junction. But we are hopeful and optimistic that a solution is close to being found and the work is going on in the background to enable the construction work to start as soon as the land ownership issue has been resolved.
Thanks,
Councillor Murray.
No, I welcome the fact that and I know that officers are continuing to be involved in these discussions. I think the community is greatly frustrated at how long it has taken, as I say, very concerned. And I have also had previous assurances that should, and I know that the number of completed houses is fast approaching the ceiling that's set in the planning conditions for this work to be complete. Now, we don't want to see the work stopping because it means employment for people in the city, but we need to see this work completed. So I'm grateful to officers for the update, and just frankly, the sooner the better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree with it. Anyone else? I think that's agreed. With the next one, please.
Item 7. And 82 street names. You have these for approval.
Again, this is just an agenda note for noting. Is there anybody wish any comment on this? I think Bill McPherson.
Yeah, I just wanted, it was a little bit difficult to hear the committee services officer there as to whether or not, I don't know if it happened to everybody, the sound was a bit dodgy, shall we say. So I don't know if we're dealing with 7A and B together or just 7A. But if we're dealing with 7A and B, it's B. I just want to make a comment on the situation at Briarwood Terrace. I would just really like to thank the officers for taking this forward. It always struck residents as slightly ridiculous that the two properties which could not be reached the same way had the same street address, and therefore the suggestion of Briarwood Walk, the committee agenda says one councillor agreed with the suggested name. That was me. I think it's just appropriate, but the point really being that the officers have helpfully found a sensible solution to a practical problem, and I'm grateful to them for doing so.
Thank you, Bill McPherson. Yes, it is 7A and B we were doing, so yeah, you're okay. Well, thank you for your kind comments. That's, I'm sure they appreciate that. Everyone else happy with that? So that's agreed. Moving on to the next one, please.
Item 8, heat network statements, non-statutory planning guidance. You have this for approval.
Developers are required under Policy 46 with the delivery of heat networks of the Dundee Local Development Plan 2019 to provide a statement with planning applications to consider the viability of creating or linking a heat network. And Dundee City Council Local Development Plan has made a commitment to issue planning guidance on the content of these statements. Their purpose is to provide applicants with a clear understanding of the level of the information required, which satisfies Policy 46, and that can be undertaken efficiently prior to submission of any planning application. This will help provide a structured, streamlined approach to delivering sustainable developments. So this report seeks approval to carry out the consultation on the content of the guidance. It is proposed that following the guidance will be finalised and reported back to the members late in the year for its approval. I have Councillor McCready.
Thanks very much, Convener. Can I firstly welcome you to your new position and wish you all the very best of luck in it. Can I ask, I mean, I welcome the report. I think it's clear that we've all got to do more to deal effectively with the climate emergency, and I think that, you know, promoting heat networks is one of the things we can do. As I understand it, we were talking about looking at requiring developers to show that they've thought about using a heat network. I'd be interested in officers' opinions on what they thought the practical barriers were to heat networks, particularly perhaps in private developments, and also, I mean, I know we might have the chance to do this when it comes back to committee, but is there anything we can do as a council, either as the planning authority or as a council, lobbying for policy change from Scottish or UK government or whoever it is responsible to make it more of a reality? That, because I think at the moment, I think there's a good chance here that we are going to produce a planning document that will make people think about having a heat network, but you know, I'd be slightly concerned if it means that it makes developers think of a few, I was going to say 101, but maybe just a few reasons why they're not going to implement a heat network. So I think, is there anything practical we could do that might make it more of a reality? Thanks, convener.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your kind words. I think it's over to Gregor Hamilton for that. He may be able to answer that question.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor McCready, for the question. Obviously, district heating networks are not new, and Dundee has a long history. But I think it's fair to say that they are an increasingly important part of the development agenda, and something that Scottish Government and others are keen to see implemented more frequently than they have been in the recent past. In terms of barriers, I think cost will clearly be one, but also the proximity to the heat source may be an issue in the short term. But the map that's included within the draft guidance does show that we do have areas where heat is produced. So the Kerr Park district heating network associated with the Regional Performance Centre, and obviously the waste to energy plant at Baldovey. And we would anticipate that over time, the number of heat sources will increase within the city, and the potential thereafter to connect development to those heat sources will increase. So I think what we're trying to do at this stage is to encourage developers, particularly of the higher density type of development, to actively consider, and we will scrutinise the statements that are submitted as part of planning applications to ensure that they are duly considering the options that are available. And where it may not be appropriate or feasible at this time, we would expect developers to make provision for the installation of district heating networks in the longer term, should they become more viable. In terms of what we as a council can do to encourage a national government level further push on this, there is work ongoing at the moment by Scottish Government to produce National Planning Framework 4, and that will incorporate Scottish planning policy. So there's a review of Scottish planning policy being undertaken at the same time as National Planning Framework 4 being produced. And it is an issue that has been raised in the early work that is being undertaken there. And it's something I think that the Council will have opportunities to push further as drafts of that document are published for consultation in the near future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Mr Hamilton. Councillor Mara.
Yeah, it's on the same kind of issue that Councillor McCready's been raising there. I mean, it's a matter of some concern. We're in the middle of a climate emergency, which we have declared as a council, and the Scottish Government have been very keen to promote this idea. But it sounds to me, from the tone of this report and some of the response that Mr Hamilton has just given, is saying that, you know, this key plank of the Scottish Government's climate emergency strategy doesn't appear to be particularly viable. So we're talking about short-term, long-term, you know, medium-term. When will any of this actually happen? What will change in the conditions? I mean, it doesn't sound to me, from what we're being told, that we'll be looking at any major district heating systems in Dundee in the foreseeable future, unless there is significant change. And given that we know that we have a climate emergency, is that not a matter of considerable concern for you, convener, perhaps?
I think the climate challenge has been recognised by this local authority last year, and the crisis we fully accept. We will be addressing some of the issues, and as much as we can. And I think district heating is one of these ones where we have a very much an interest in doing this within the city. Mr Hamilton, would you have any other comments?
Well, I certainly didn't mean to sound that this is something that is not feasible in the short term. There are clearly opportunities to capitalise on the existing heat sources that we have, and one only has to look at the Mitchell and Scotland Innovation Park to see the advantage that being in close proximity to the waste to energy plant is bringing for that development site. There are further development opportunities along the Dundee corridor, which may well benefit from excess heat that's being generated from the facility at Kerr Park. So I think there are opportunities, certainly in the short term, to expand the heat networks that exist within Dundee. And what the guidance is doing is ensuring that developers actively consider those when they're bringing forward development proposals, of a suitable scale. So this is not for every development in the city. It's those that are major developments or are located close to a source of heat that exists at the moment or may be provided in the future. But I think we will certainly consult with developers, with agents and with other groups who will be actively wanting to promote this type of activity. And we look forward to receiving comments that will then inform the final draft of the guidance that we'll bring back to committee for approval in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, just to follow on from the point that you made, obviously, I think there's no point in conflating more than one issue. I think the fundamental point is, as you've rightly said, not only have we declared a climate emergency, but we already have a very thorough, robust district heating strategy that was agreed previously by council, and in that there's quite ambitious proposals encompassing a whole swathe of the city, including many of the areas of multiple deprivation. So that ambition, I think, is very clear. And as I said at the last P&R, there will be a further report to come back to committee, which will detail some actions that we're looking to take forward. And associated with those actions will be requests for funding. And I think it's also important to recognise that in recent weeks, with announcements from Scottish Government in terms of additional funding in the programme for government, sustainability and those environmental considerations are at the heart of that. And we want to make sure that Dundee is well positioned to take advantage of the fact that we have robust plans and clear strategies that have been agreed. So I think we're in a very good position to be able to help Scottish Government realise their ambitions, but also, in essence, to realise the ambitions that we have locally and deliver those benefits to the people in Dundee. And I think just it's worth shouting out about, I suppose, the work that's been undertaken in the last few years that has resulted in a decrease of 7% in terms of fuel poverty. So there's a lot of good work there. There's a lot of ambition. And I think the next stage of that is looking at what our aspirations are and trying to obtain some grant and central government funding to be able to take that to the next level. So, I think there'll be further detail that will come forward, as I've said before, in future reports. And hopefully elected members will welcome those with open arms.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Short.
I was wanting to ask Mr. Hamilton, we were obviously an exemplar. Way back 100 years ago, we had a district heating system in what is now the West End ward at the Elms and the Limes. Isn't in existence today, but we were doing this all these years ago. And we have, I believe, 10 out of 11 of our multi-stories within the city are district heating systems within those. So we're very much leading by example. Is that something that Mr. Hamilton does share with the developers to show them that we are leaders in this field, and it's something that we're very proud of and something that we would encourage within the city?
Mr. Hamilton.
I think certainly, that long history of district heating in Dundee and the more recent commitment to addressing the climate emergency is something that we regularly discuss with developers at the pre-application stage. And I think having particularly strong examples in the city does help to demonstrate what can be achieved. I think there will be more examples emerging in Dundee and indeed across Scotland in coming years as developers are increasingly encouraged to consider how they can make sure that their developments have a climate reduction agenda at the heart. We're already seeing that through other policy applications in the local development plan in terms of renewable energy sources within developments. And I think this is just another piece of the jigsaw which is helping to create a much greener future.
Thank you. I think that's a valid point. It's a greener future and a low carbon economy we're actually looking for. Anyone has any other comments? I can't see anyone. Is this report agreed? Thank you. Next.
Item 9, area of special control for adverts. You have this for approval.
The Central Waterfront is a carefully designed and contributes significantly to our cultural and architectural and aesthetic value of the city, and the high quality design is essential in the success of this area. It's recognised that whilst advertisements form an important part and an element of business premises, the proliferation of uncontrolled advertising could undermine the visual quality, character and appearance of the central waterfront itself. So it's proposed to promote the area of special control within the central waterfront. This would not prevent adverts, as some believe, but would introduce a requirement to obtain an advertisement consent for many signs and prevent the uncontrolled proliferation, as I said, of poorly designed adverts. So this report seeks to promote the area of special control within the central waterfront and remit the Head of Planning and Economic Development to undertake the necessary legal procedures, including seeking approval by Scottish ministers. I have Councillor Malone, yes, you're the first one. Charlie?
Yeah. I've had to switch my camera off because I think there must be an attempt someplace by somebody insidious that every time I want to talk to something, my technology quits on me. I have to say, I welcome your comments. I think that it is absolutely correct that we maintain aesthetics and aesthetics that are appropriate to the area. When I was reading this report, though, the word style council came to mind. And one of my favourite sub-by-style council is Promised Land, and it seemed to be that there was a bit of attention being paid to the waterfront, quite rightly, that's maybe not being paid to other parts of the city. I mean, what we're talking about here is an area of special control, and I've got a few questions. Are there any other areas of special control in Dundee? What is the process for designating an area of special control? Are communities going to be invited to take part in designating their areas as areas of special control? Given that we're looking at the historical, cultural and the aesthetic of an area, I could point to parts of Lochee that have made a significant contribution to the economic and cultural history of Dundee. And I'm sure my colleagues in Broughty Ferry and West End and elsewhere can equally identify areas of special control. So if this is not just to be seen about the waterfront and it's much more about managing the aesthetics of advertising throughout the city, maybe some answers to those questions.
I think I've lost you, Councillor Malone, but I'll pass you over to the Executive Director first of all, if that's okay. Sorry. Hello? Sorry, Charlie, I think you've got some poor signal there. I'll be on to the Executive Director. Mr. Preswood?
Many thanks, Convener. The proposal does involve the opportunity for the public to participate in the proposed introduction of the area of special control. I can honestly say I do not know whether there are other areas where an area of special control has been introduced, but I'll pass over to the Head of Planning and Economic Development to provide more detail on the process and to share with us details of any other schemes that exist.
Thank you, Convener. It's not a measure that has been recently used in Dundee, but historically there have been areas of special advertisement control applied to the Overgate Centre to control advertising on the exterior of the Overgate, and also in the much further in the past, the Kingsway West Retail Park. I think there is a recollection amongst longer serving members of the planning team that there was such a provision originally applied in the Kingsway. The reality is that many parts of the city are already subject to control of advertisements, and essentially a lot of the historic parts of Dundee, which are now designated as conservation areas, if there's a proposal to erect an advert either on a building or a freestanding advert, that would need to secure permission in the form of an advertisement consent. It's a form of planning application that is on the weekly list and on occasions may come to the planning committee for determination. And that assessment is based on what is set down in the advertisement regulations. So it's a consideration based on road safety and amenity. And if an advert would have a detrimental impact on either of those matters, then it would be within the gift of the decision maker to refuse advertisement consent for that proposal. In terms of the process for designating an area of special advert control, an order would be prepared by the council and then submit that to Scottish ministers, who then publicise it. And there is an opportunity then for communities, other stakeholders to make representations. and Scottish ministers will take those representations into account before either confirming the order, modifying the order, or not confirming the order. What it would mean if the order is confirmed is that planning permission or advertisement consent would be required for certain types of advert within the central waterfront. And the reason why it's felt appropriate to do this in the waterfront is because that area is not currently part of a conservation area. So other parts of the city centre are already protected from a proliferation of inappropriate adverts, but the waterfront is not. And given the high quality public realm that has been created within that area, it is felt to be the right approach to take. Councillor Malone, you mentioned Lochee. So Lochee High Street is a conservation area, so there's advert control there. Parts of the West End and Broughty Ferry, you also mentioned, are also parts of conservation areas, so there's a level of control that already exists through the planning system for those areas. But no such protection at the moment exists within the central waterfront, hence the reason we believe it's appropriate to bring this approach forward for consideration at this time.
Thank you.
Can I have a
Malone wants to come
follow-up
back? Yeah, go ahead.
This is just a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but who's going to determine what constitutes tasteful advertising?
Mr. Hamlin?
Communities, as I said before, it's based on amenity and road safety. So the actual content of an advert is not something that we can comment upon. But clearly there are other bodies that will enforce inappropriate advertising. So on that taste element, that is controlled by the Advertising Standards Authority. We would look at it from a design perspective and then from a road safety perspective. And these are the matters that would be taken into consideration in determining any applications for advertisement consent. And obviously they will appear on the weekly list, and if a member so wishes, he could ask, or he or she could ask, that the application is brought to planning committee for determination.
Okay,
Thank you for that.
Grateful for that. I'm grateful for that, Greg, and I'm sure that you will become the cultural czar that will monitor and regulate the aesthetics of anything that goes up. So thanks for your answers. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Convener. Congratulations on your new role. Yeah, I'm pleased to see this proposal. Most of that area is within the Maryfield work, which I represent. We certainly wouldn't want to see the waterfront becoming like Times Square, adorned with advertising. My particular question is slightly related to what Councillor Malone was saying. I would like to see the content of advertising restricted by presumption, really, and I'm thinking particularly of advertisements for gambling or alcohol. Is there a way that we could look at having a presumption against them so that members wouldn't have to be scanning the forthcoming planning applications, for example?
Mr. Hamlin, can you answer that?
Convener, it would not be appropriate for the council to exercise planning control over content that it seeks to limit. Clearly, legislation from government does state what is acceptable in terms of advertisement and where. And obviously anyone who wishes to erect an advert would have to abide by that legislation. But for the purpose of the planning system, it is only amenity and road safety that we can take into consideration, and not the content or the goods that are being advertised on any advert.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lynn, do you want to come back?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Duncan.
Thanks, Convener. Just a question on this zone and other similar zones. Just relates to a wee bit of an irritation that I have about various organisations who invest in vehicles, plaster them with adverts, and then park them all day, every day, you know, by the side of the road and such like. Will this sort of proposal give the council any powers to frankly move these sort of vehicles on?
I don't want to say what Mr. Hamilton answer that one, I think.
In and of itself, we need to determine whether or not the advertisement forms or constitutes development, and there's an assessment that we would need to undertake. There are other measures that may be implementable if it's attached to a vehicle. So you would obviously assess whether the vehicle is legal and if it's within an area where parking is permitted. And planning enforcement doesn't always act as quickly as members of the public and others would like, whereas other enforcement powers might bring forward a more prompt resolution of the matter. I've no doubt I'm aware of some of the issues that Councillor Duncan is talking about, and if there are any specific concerns, then I'm happy for these to be investigated by the planning team and to see where and what action might be appropriate in certain circumstances.
Okay, no, that's helpful. It's just that, you know, elsewhere certainly I've certainly had occasion to complain about such vehicles, and it takes forever, frankly, to get rid of them. So I just wondered if this particular proposal would in any way speed that up.
Mr. Hamilton, do you want to come back to that? Or?
I think it would bring some level of control. So whether it's mobile advertising or any form of advert, I think without this area of special advert control being in place, there are certain things that could happen that we would be powerless to take any action over. The fact that we may have such an area, if it's confirmed by Scottish ministers, would give the ability for the council to intervene where there has been a breach of that control. But that would not necessarily be in every instance. We would need to assess the specifics and determine what action would be possible and the appropriate way forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keenan.
Okay, thank you, convener. Just to say that, you know, I would like to have seen something coming across the city a bit wider than that. I think a lot of councillors have mentioned tonight about the sort of number of adverts that happen in other areas. I remember driving down McAlpine Road and counting 50 posters, stroke banners that had been put up on railings that probably belonged to council and looking for them to be removed. You know, I understand that business will try to advertise where they can, but when there's so many of them, it looks an absolute eyesore. Others have mentioned the sort of vehicles that park, no doubt a legal vehicle, but we've got many areas in the city where there's a trailer being done up as a little advertisement board. There's 3 of them lie on Dunsinane Estate that people pass on the Kingsway. It's a poor reflection of Dundee when they drive past these on a regular basis. And it's in some type of advertising board that somebody's knocked over. It's taken up a bit of carriageway while it does that. So I'm wondering whether we need to bring in a much wider approach to advertising than just the waterfront.
Thank you for that. I think when it comes to amenity and road safety, I think the road safety factor is quite high in the agenda. So, Mr. Hamilton, would you like to come back on that?
Convener, the issues that Bailey Keenan raised, I think we are aware of, and I think the frustration that communities feel when adverts indiscriminately appear on railings along the roadside or elsewhere in communities, I think they are shared by officers. We, across the council, it's not just a planning function in response to this. Colleagues within the roads team also are quite active where there's inappropriate advertising placed on council assets. We can go in and remove it. If it's on a private railing or private property, it is more difficult. Planning enforcement, as I said before, does not act quickly. There's a long process that we need to go through in order to effect the change that we're looking for, and there are rights of appeal to bodies during that process, which may mean that ultimately we're unsuccessful. Some of the other tools that may be at the council's disposal might have a quicker impact, and we work closely with colleagues in other parts of city development where it's appropriate to do so to try and address the issue. There is something of a, you know, we're fighting against a tide here, that we can go in and take action and remove a significant number of these adverts, but inevitably businesses will seek to try and capitalise once these adverts are removed by putting them in different places or or putting them up again, and it's a constant battle. It is very difficult, and it's not just an issue in Dundee, it is an issue across urban areas and indeed rural areas sometimes across the country. But it's something that I'm happy to have a further discussion with colleagues in City Development to see how we respond to the issue across Dundee and what measures that we might be able to take within the resources that are available to try and bring forward some improvement.
Convener,
thank you, Phil.
Given that I've mentioned the ones that sit in Dunsinane, I wonder if officers could agree among themselves who would best take that forward to have these ones removed.
Yeah, I think Mr. Hamilton will take that forward with the officers, I think, and have discussions on that. Mr. Hamilton, you okay with it?
Thank you.
Thanks. Is this, I have no one else coming in. Is this report agreed? It is, thank you. Can we move on to the next one?
Item 10, tenders received by Head of Design and Property. You have this for approval.
This item is seeking approval to accept 4 separate tenders with a total expenditure of just over £1 million for works to various properties and infrastructure within the city. These include the city centre Christmas lights and decoration display, and upgrade works to Easton and Wallaston nurseries, and the restoration and repairs to the Finlathen viaduct. I have no one wishing to speak on that, so thank you. This is agreed. Yes, we go on to the next one, please.
That takes us to the confidential agenda. Do you wish to deal with this in the usual way?
No, Convener.
Sorry. I think Councillor McCree just came in there.
Yeah, I've got a question on item 17, and I think Councillor Mara might have a question on 16. Yep.
Yes, he does. So, hold on a sec.
Convener, at that stage, would the committee agree the other items in the confidential part of the agenda?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
So we're just having item 16 and 17.
At this stage then, could we please ask all members of the press and public to leave the meeting?